Thank you for joining us for our webinar tonight. I am Emma Jackson. My pronouns are he, she, and they. I'm a senior at Cherokee Trail, and I've been working with the Youth Celebrate Diversity Student Board since about September of 2022. Youth Celebrate Diversity is dedicated to educating and empowering youth in order to advance inclusion and equity for all. We believe that education is a fundamental human right and one of the critical tools every young person needs to succeed in life. We believe that change must come from within a community and not from outside forces. We're working towards a more just and equitable society that values every human being. We believe in the young people who will lead us to this vision. I'd like to start by introducing some of our wonderful panelists who have joined us tonight. If I could have each of you, we could start with John. Just introduce yourselves, tell us your pronouns, your name, and what you do.
Hi, my name is John Ongermeyer. My pronouns are he and they. Right now, I don't necessarily have a typical job, as it were, but I am very involved in the United Methodist Church at a legislative and jurisdictional level, going to conferences and determining certain future legislative, the legislative future of the United Methodist Church. I am a part of doing that in this region. I was also involved with the Cherry Creek Diversity Conference, what Youth Celebrate Diversity used to be, back in high school, and I was the co-chair my senior year in 2008. So I'm really excited to be here and really excited to have this conversation. It's a really important conversation. It's not necessarily the most exciting topic, but I'm glad that everybody is here to join us today.
Hi, Debi Jackson. My pronouns are she, her. I am the parents of a transgender teen, Avery Jackson, that some of you might be familiar with. I live in Kansas City, Missouri, and essentially I advocate for trans kids full time. I have a very conservative background, was a Southern Baptist Republican, eek, and then had my world turned upside down and my eyes and my heart opened really wide by having the most amazing kid possible, two actually, but you know, we're here to talk about one. And because of that, and because our kids were not able to go to the school that we had planned to send them to, because we faced so much family rejection, because bathroom bills started appearing 7 or 8 years ago now, we jumped in as a family to advocacy. And that's where I spend my time right now, especially monitoring what's happening in all 50 states. I kind of support parents and families who have to go testify for the first time, who have never given a speech in public, to know what to say, how to protect their privacy, and just be confident that their voices matter, and find the strength to go in and take part.
And I am Jenn Curtin, she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Communications for the Equality Federation. We're a national LGBTQ plus advocacy organization, and we partner with state groups who are advocating for the rights of LGBTQ plus people in their states. And so a lot of the work that I do is partnering with groups on the ground to share resources and, like Debbie said, prep people to talk in their communities about these issues, and really just to fight for the rights of LGBTQ plus people. So happy to be here.
Thank you all for sharing. Well, that was lovely. But just in those introductions already, we've heard a lot of different terms thrown out that describe different LGBTQ people. We've heard primarily trans, but the term LGBTQ in general is an umbrella that includes lots of different identities relating to gender and sexuality and even more different kinds of identities. So could we have each of you discuss just generally what LGBTQ means and what each of those identities represents?
I would be more than happy to talk about some of my own personal identity labels and sort of where I fall. Largely, I identify as queer because I encapsulate the Q in the LGBTQ, largely because it can be simpler than explaining I am a non-binary individual who is attracted to more than two gender. Like, it just gets really complicated. And so for me, the LGBTQ is a simplified version of the inner truths that we're seeking out for ourselves. And those labels can be really important. For a long time, it was like, labels are for cans of soup. But labels also tell you if there's any allergy information in that can of soup, right? Like, if you're allergic to wheat and it's not a gluten-free soup, you might be in trouble. And so the labels to me can be really important. And so if we break down into my micro labels, I would go with bisexual, so the B, and non-binary under the T, under the transgender. And so for me, it's bisexual being attracted to more than two genders or two or more genders. And the trans aspect, I was assigned female at birth. And then in my early 20s, started questioning my gender, came out as a trans male, and then recently have started leaning into a non-binary identity, where there's an aspect of my gender that's not exactly male, but it's not exactly female either. So those micro labels can get really important, and they can also get really confusing. The others, please feel free to add other label information.
Yeah, I will just add in. So I also identify as queer, but for a long time did identify as the L, a lesbian, so a woman who is attracted to other women. But I too have found queer to kind of just be more representative of how I feel and who I am, and that it's not limiting in who I am attracted to. And then the G for gay is usually men who are attracted to other men. And yeah, I think you described all those other ones. I really, I sometimes the Q can stand for questioning in other spaces, but I think for most folks now, it does stand for queer, and that's really like a reclaiming of that term for our community.
Okay, so you all did a great job of distinguishing between a lot of these different identities, but especially when when queer activist movements were first arising, there was a strange conflation of trans activism, which is a focus on gender identity, and other forms of queer activism, which focus on sexuality. So I was wondering your thoughts on why these two so often get mixed together and what the fundamental differences between those movements are.
I've been jumping in first a lot, so feel free to jump in first otherwise. But I think historically, a lot of the activism that was started in regards to, I mean, we talk about Stonewall a lot. And how a trans woman was the one who threw the first brick at Stonewall. Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, Miss Major. There are other names, but these are all trans women or butch lesbian women of color. Some identified as transvestites at the time, some identified as trans, some identified as non-binary. And so when there was a push against the sodomy laws, I think. There was really a push against the sodomy laws, and that crackdown, the government crackdown happened primarily against trans people first. They were the people that seemed to be targeted first. And I wonder, I don't know that I have any sources about this, but I wonder about how, if it has to do with how visible we can be. There is a privilege in being able to pass like I do, and look like I am a cis straight person. But there's some struggles that come with that. There's a sense of isolation at times. But that if you are not able to get the hormones or the surgeries or anything like that, then you are more likely to be identified off the bat or clocked as queer. And if there is some kind of systemic action taking place against your group of people, if you are the most visible, you will be the ones who are attacked first.
I'll jump in and add too. Coming from a conservative background, I can tell you that I think a lot of times the work of the movement has had to lump together because it's simply people who are being oppressed by the cisgender heterosexual world. Because in my world of Southern Baptists, there are people who don't understand the difference. And even if you explain after you do the terminology, they'll still stumble and say, is their gender orientation, and I don't understand identities, and wait, if you're a transgender person, so you were born a boy, but you're attracted to then a boy or a girl, how are you? And they don't get it. And really, a lot of what was happening at Stonewall and a lot of what's happening right now, particularly with bills that are attempts to ban drag performance, and I know we'll get into legislative stuff later, the way that they are defining drag is anyone who wears clothes of the opposite sex or puts on makeup, which is what they were fighting at Stonewall. And those laws had gone, they were more than 100 years old, and now we're seeing them again. So a bill that is meant to oppress and restrict a drag performance could actually be used to target a trans woman walking down the street. And that same bill could be used to arrest people at a pride celebration, because you could have a gay man who's queer and likes to wear some makeup and nail polish, and that's going to be a ding against them. So I really think it just stems from needing to come together as oppressed groups and find strength in numbers.
Yeah, I would say, I would just add to that our struggles are the same. A lot of the time we've been fighting for the same recognition and the same rights historically for so long. Really, in the majority of states right now, you can still be fired, denied housing, denied public accommodations based on your sexual orientation or gender identity. So a lot of the times the oppression that we face is very, very similarly linked, like Debbie said.
There we go. I think there's also just sort of a matter of intersectionality. If you're going to have some sexuality questions, you're probably going to have some gender nonconforming stuff going on too. And if there's some gender nonconformance happening, you're most likely going to be questioning your sexuality, because gender gets real confusing when you throw those two together. But it's very much, I think, an intersection. It's not necessarily two separate aspects of life.
I want to jump on something that John and Debbie both have kind of alluded to, which is that since people are made up of so many different fundamental identities, sometimes when they conflict with each other, it can be hard to reconcile with those, especially in terms of religion, like Debbie touched on, and of sexuality versus gender. So what are some of the ways that we can allow those identities to coexist within ourselves, or do we have to completely reject some of our previous selves in order to live as a queer person?
I have to think about that last part of that question there a little bit, but I don't think that we need to reject any part of ourselves. I think we need to recognize where those pieces of ourselves intersect. For many people who are Black and identify as female, they have a completely different set of struggles as people who are Black and identify as male, and as people who are Black and identify as trans, or identify as gay, or identify as whatever. And so when it comes to particularly things like race and nationality, it culture can really impact and influence the way that we interact with our own identities as well. As for the religion stuff, I spent some time in seminary, and that was right at the beginning of my transition. And ironically enough, I went to Iliff School of Theology in Denver, and ironically enough, it was the place I needed to be early transition. It was a very queer school. It's one of the most gay seminaries in the country, probably. We had a pretty high percentage of students that were out. We had a pretty high percentage of students that wanted to go into queer ministry, things like that. And, the thing that sort of helped me reconcile my identities with my religion was the amount of support I got from my family, where, they just accepted me for who I was. There was a little bit of an adjustment period, but now my parents are my biggest supporters. And the other thing was sort of the flip side of that coin was the family that didn't support me. I had an aunt who, my dad was an exchange student. It was one of those siblings. She sent me a letter dead naming me after I sent out my I'm trans letter. She sent me a letter dead naming me and quoting the Bible and quoting things and saying that I have been lied to by the devil, and things like that. And I had a couple of thoughts after that. One, if the devil's going to lie to me, I'm pretty important. And two, the Bible verses that she quoted were actually really affirming. It was I knew you in your mother's womb. I knit you in your mother's womb before you were born. I knew you before you were born, Psalms, all of that, where it was this, I don't think this is a mistake. I think this is who I am meant to be. This is the journey I am meant to go on. And what I had to do with that, or what I did with that, was really what made me the person that I am now. If I had gotten stuck in the guilt, if I had been trying to reject any of that past part of myself, I would not be in as good of a place as I am now. I'd not be as happy as I am. I would still be struggling. That's not to say I don't struggle now, but it's really, if you can integrate more pieces of your identity into other pieces of your identity, in my opinion, I feel more whole when I am able to do that. I feel like a more whole person.
Thank you for sharing that. That was a very beautiful story. When you mentioned that it's when we are able to allow those identities to come together, we feel whole and have united ourselves. And because of that, when we see increases in anti-trans violence, we also very frequently see religious groups perpetuating the reasoning behind it. So when we consider that, how can we address the many different causes for the recent rise in violence against trans people? And what are some of those other causes besides just religious groups?
There actually is one group that I want to bring to the attention of folks who are going to watch this, and that is what is known in the United Methodist Church, as the IRD, or the Institute on Religion and Democracy. They are responsible, there is evidence, and they are responsible for essentially the split behind the splits in many of the mainline denominations. The thing is, they are not a religious group. They are a secular group. They have ties, as far as I know. They are currently working on the splinter in the United Methodist Church, and they chose to focus on the anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. And so recognizing that sometimes those religious influences are actually being influenced by secular things can bring it about full circle to say, oh, this legislation might sound very religious rhetoric and they are pulling their rhetoric from religion. But a lot of the funding and a lot of the foundations of it may not be religious themselves. They may be coming from outside of those religious institutions. That's not to say those religious institutions are not doing harm. They are very much still falling into the traps, basically, that are being set for them. And so if you are going to engage with somebody who has a very strong religious opinion on this, my first suggestion is be well-versed in not just like the religious writings, so not just in scripture and things like that, but also the theologies of the churches and the denominations of people that you're interacting with frequently. That kind of thing. I'm not sure that's answering the question exactly, so you may need to ask it again, but that is one institute group that I wanted to bring to the attention, at the very least, of my other panelists, the Institute of Religion and Democracy, and other folks as well, is that sometimes you just have to follow the money to find out what's really going on.
I never want to step on Jen's toes as an org here. So I think there are some questions about whether or not we're seeing more actual violence towards the trans community, or if we're just more aware of it. Because we see even now in news stories, people are being misgendered. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's what happens. Sometimes we find out, when we're putting together transgender Day of Remembrance lists, we will come across people who had been killed months ago, and we didn't realize they were trans because of the way that the police took the report, because of the way that the media reported on them. We have to wait for some friends potentially to come out and say, this is who this person was and how I knew them. So it's like trying to figure out the question with the chicken and the egg. Is there more violence now against the trans community, or are we more aware of it because it's finally being reported and because trans people are more visible themselves in society as a whole? When we talk about statistics and people trying to pass bills will say, generations before of trans people survived without access to healthcare at 12 and 13 and 15. What's it going to hurt this generation? Well, we don't know that previous generations survived. Those folks aren't here to tell us their stories if they didn't. So, for me, it's not a matter of, is there a greater increase? It's what can we do to stop it and to prevent it? Yes, there's a lot more. We see people going to drag story times with really big weapons. So yeah, there's a more a visible presence and threat of violence. But I have friends who transitioned in the 60s who might tell us that they were more afraid then than they are now. So I think the question isn't so much has the violence increased, but how do we respond to it? How do we get people in power to pay attention and respond to it? How do we get the involvement from the community, from the churches, from the police departments to take those crimes seriously and actually go after people? How do we reform the criminal justice system and get rid of the trans panic laws that are allowed in so many places? Like those are the things that I think we can take part in working on to change that narrative and the discussion that we have.
Yeah, and I would just add to that as more, when people's lives and their abilities to exist is debated in legislatures, like it's going to give some people permission to be violent and have hate. And I think that that's a lot of what we're seeing is the increase in even discussions about these anti-trans bills that we're seeing across the country sparks a lot of people who are very hateful to feel validated in their beliefs and to choose violence. And so it's not necessarily that it's maybe happening more, but I think we're seeing it more, and people are feeling more validated in their ability to publicly dislike trans people and be violent towards them.
We've touched on a lot of different kinds of anti-trans legislation that has been coming out, but one of the specific types that we haven't yet specifically defined is gender-affirming healthcare. So I was wondering if each of you could talk about what that is and why it's such a hotly contested type of legislation, especially now.
Gender affirming healthcare is healthcare that allows people to make decisions for themselves and live the most authentic way that they can. I think it's important when we talk about gender affirming care that we break things down into a few different categories. We talk about gender affirming care and a lot of what these bills are targeting and the rhetoric surrounding the bills. They take issue with gender clinics that see kids as young as 2 and 3 and their families. I can tell you, we went to one, our first appointment with an endocrinologist was when Avery was 4. And the endocrinologist said, "Nice to meet you. Some people are trans, and it's really awesome that you changed names and pronouns and let them pick out clothes. And then we'll see you in a few years. Call us if you need some support, family." And that's what the care is. That's what happens at a lot of these gender care clinics that are being debated and frankly lied about in the media right now. Gender affirming care in the younger ages is helping families process having a trans kid and get over dealing with the extended family member who's going to keep sending Christmas cards in the dead name, and how to deal with the school that's going to fight you over bathroom access. So the care really is more just about supporting the family as a whole. When it comes time for puberty, we can consider puberty blockade, or what we call puberty blockers. And those are essentially the pause button that gives kids and families more time to figure out what steps they may or may not want to take moving forward, but without going through the negative impact of a puberty that they know is wrong for them, or that they're just not sure if it's right or wrong for them, and they need the time to figure that out. Puberty blockers are not experimental. They've been used for decades in kids with precocious puberty. Kids with precocious puberty are generally on blockers much longer than trans youth are on blockers. So we do know that they're safe, even if they're used off-label. Lots of medications are used the exact same way. Then moving forward with consultations, with having therapists who have been involved with supporting the family and the child, with an endocrinologist, with lots of informed consent, families are able to decide if they're ready for their adolescent or teenager to go on to HRT or something like that. So again, there are different ages that are involved, but also when you hear language like children, people imagine 5-year-olds. Children do not have hormones. Teenagers can have hormones, not someone before the teen years. So we really need to think about the language that we use there. But as you know, again, gender affirming care can be having therapists to talk to. And in a lot of places, they want to even take away that from people so that you cannot be affirmed in your belief of who you are or your knowledge of who you are, which is frighteningly going to push people towards conversion therapy. So we need to think about that. But then, you know, beyond that, there are other options as you get older. Other folks can talk about those. We are not there yet. Avery now also identifies as non-binary. So even if someone had been on one trajectory for many, many years of their life, when they start in the realm of healthcare, they can pause and reflect, and they can start and stop with the help of their healthcare providers to figure out the care that's right for them. Like, there's no one way of approaching healthcare for a trans person. It's very individualized. It's very personalized to the person to find out what's right for them and what their body goals are. And I think that's the part that a lot of folks are missing in the conversation.
I think I also want to point out that postmenopausal cis women are also on hormone replacement therapies. I have a cis male uncle who is on hormone replacement therapies because he has low testosterone. These hormone, this gender affirming healthcare can be for cis people too, when it comes to especially the medical side of things. And I don't think people realize that. And if they do start taking away things like HRT, what will that do to cis folks who need care in that realm? I mean, that is a thing.
That's a great point. I want to jump back in real quick just to illustrate the story you were saying. I have a friend that I caught up with a couple of weeks ago. She has a 17-year-old daughter who was just diagnosed with PCOS. And the very first thing that they said is, we need to get you on some blockers. We need to check your estrogen levels. We need to boost things because you don't want to look like a man, right? You don't want to grow facial hair and have your voice drop. So we need to make sure that you look like the girl you know you are. She was offered gender affirming care. She knows she's a girl. Okay, we're going to give you every treatment that we can to make sure that you still feel confident in presenting as a girl. And then my friend was like, ironically, I know that you would not get that and it could become illegal. And yet they threw it at us. We need to make sure that you are girly enough. Please take this blocker, take these other hormones, so that you can meet the standards that our society has set and have no questions asked. And I also want to point out too that in all of these healthcare bills, they are making carve-outs to continue to perform surgeries on intersex children. So when they're worried about the age of consent and people having irreversible procedures and they can't decide and determine who they are, if you're talking about babies and infants and toddlers who are not getting the choice, they certainly have no voice at that age and they cannot consent to anything. It's really gross that they are making exceptions to allow that kind of barbaric treatment to continue.
Debbie, just now you mentioned the age of consent for transitioning and gender affirming care. And that has been something that's been weaponized really intensely by lots of right-wing anti-queer conservative groups. And one of the types of stories that they will use to justify that are the stories of people who have detransitioned, as in people who had initially transitioned to a gender besides the one they were assigned at birth, but now have since moved back. I was wondering what you were thinking about these stories. Are they simply just being weaponized, or is there something more to the way the media has been highlighting them?
I appreciate that you are saying the word weaponized and that you said it twice in setting up that question, because yes, that's exactly what it is. And even without going into the detransition stories themselves, to make the point that they are weaponizing age, when they first introduced these bills, they said, we must protect the children from surgery. And that's all that they were talking about. And then they decided that, oh, we must protect the children from these puberty blockers because once they start puberty blockers, we see that most of them go on to hormones. So it must be the puberty blockers. And then they decided that, oh my gosh, maybe, the age of consent, the age of majority in a lot of places is 16 is too young because 17 and 18-year-olds, we don't want to give them agency either. So let's ban it for anyone under the age of 19. And then in other places, they're like, oops, up to 21, because you can go to war and you can do all kinds of other things, but you can't know who you are yet and make decisions. And then they decided on the other end that, well, even social affirmation tends to get these confused kids to think they only have one trajectory left in life. So maybe we should start policing the social transition. And then, ooh, people have come in and said brains aren't fully developed until 25. So maybe we shouldn't allow anyone under the age of 25 when you could have gone through college and started your career, but you still can't know what you want for yourself. So they keep moving the goalposts, which proves that they really don't care about people being able to make decisions. They are also very ableist in their language, and they are making exceptions for people on the autism spectrum and saying that there are people who cannot ever make decisions for themselves. They don't have the capacity. So there's just so much ugliness around it as a whole. As for the detrans stories, yes, there are some people who are out there who have regrets. The numbers are not in the quantities that should come in and ever take away the ability for people who need care to access it. If anything, they should be pushing for more support for the people who do have regret. In terms of the age of the people that they're bringing in, we had someone who came and testified here who didn't start transitioning until their late 30s and then said they had regret later. So they're using people who didn't transition in childhood or know who they were in their teen years to weaponize their stories against younger folks right now too, saying, if I didn't know at 40, how could a 14-year-old know? So they keep changing the bar. And it really is manipulative. But I would like to remind people, if there were any other form of healthcare that had a 98% success rate, we would be writing books about it. How did they get it so right? This is amazing. And when it comes down to concern over 2% versus the 98% who would suffer if you take it away, that's literally the definition of transphobia. You are so worried about the cisgender person potentially making a mistake that you're willing to risk the lives of the 98% of people who say, this is what I need. And there's no way around that fact. And then there are some people who are in the detransition group who didn't detransition. They just made a shift in their journey and they veered somewhere else. They still don't consider themselves cisgender. And we're not taking account for people who started down one path and decided to course correct or find a way that they felt more comfortable. That doesn't mean that they're no longer part of the umbrella, can be part of the community, can be part of these conversations.
Additionally, I'd like to point out, so what if it's a choice? Why can't you respect my choice? And the other thing that I hear somewhat often is, so what if it's a phase? The moon has phases and it's still the moon. We very much have this idea, especially in the West, of there's one way, you will be this way your entire life. That is how things are going to be. And there's not this fluidity and this flexibility that there might be in many other cultures. And it's a very rigid way of thinking about how we are as people. I mean, humans will shift and vary, and one experience will change your entire life for the rest of your life. And that can impact your identity. I do know that there are people who choose to be under the LGBTQ umbrella because of things like trauma. And that doesn't make their identity any less valid than somebody who might identify that way because they were born that way. We have to recognize that experiences can shape who we are. And if that leads us to making a different choice than what might be standard, why is that any less respectful? Why is that any less valid? Why is that anything worth condemning?
I don't think I could add anything more beautifully than the two of you have just said, but I will say that for the rare case, I think it's less than 2% of folks who do decide to detransition and seek care. They are seeking gender affirming care to detransition. So it still, like, I think to Debbie's point, like there's such a misunderstanding of what gender affirming care means and the fact that everyone accesses it at some point. And we're really removing that for all people, and how ridiculous that is.
While we've been talking about these detransitioning policies and the weaponization of those stories, we've also simultaneously seen the suppression of queer language within educational circles and these different kinds of groups. When I hear about them, lots of this legislation justifies restricting queer language and queer pedagogy by claiming the age of consent is people should not be experiencing queer questioning or doubt just because they are not old enough. We've seen a very publicized example in the infamous Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. And I was wondering about your thoughts on the suppression of even language in queer circles.
There we go. I think that the suppression of language is really one of the first steps in the suppression of a group of people. If you take away their ability to talk about themselves, the ability to defend themselves, then there's no possible way for them to legally gain any kind of traction in reversing any of the Don't Say Gay bills. If you can't say gay, how are you going to address it? The other thing that comes to mind is I have done quite a bit of research on World War II, primarily the social aspect and the social impacts of the rise of the Nazi Party. And one of the first things they did, this is something that most people actually don't know, a lot of people don't know about, but some of the initial book burnings were done at a university of sexuality and gender, basically, research. The professor there was doing some of the first research on trans surgeries, some very early research on trans identities, queer identities, things like that. And that is one of the first places that the Nazi Party attacked, because it was such a place of kind of rabble rousing, I guess, a little bit of social activity that they wanted to suppress. And so one of the first things they did was they shut it down. And that was in the mid 30s, I believe, mid to late 30s, before the war really kicked off. And that's one of the things that, if you look at history, we are in a very dangerous place. And it is one of those moments where we really have to consider, they came for the trans people and I said nothing. And then they came for the gay people and I said nothing. And then they came for the Jews and I said nothing. And then they came for me and there was no one left to say anything. And that's where we're headed with a lot of this. And so that's why I think they're starting with the language. They want to take away our ability to do much of anything about it, which is why we really need our allies to stand up and say, this is not okay. We will not allow these bills to go into action. And if they do, we're going to make noise about it.
Yeah, I think to add to that, the goal of these bills is really to remove the support within schools for queer kids to even have any support system. You know, if they're not having support within their families, a lot of times a lot of support systems are within schools. And if you can't talk about it at school, where are you going to talk about it? And so I think that a lot of, removing care for kids, removing the ability to talk with supportive counselors and teachers, or just other peers at school, like the opposition is really trying to just remove any type of support and like ability for trans and queer kids to thrive and to like exist in this world. And it is truly terrifying just what they're trying to chip away at one by one to make it more and more difficult for queer and trans people to exist in this country.
I work with a lot of educators and go into schools to help them learn how to support their kids, because we didn't get supported in schools. And I didn't know at the time that I had a right to fight for my kid to be affirmed there. And they've taught me that there's a concept in education of mirrors and windows, that you have to be able to see yourself reflected in your books, in your discussion, to know that you are normal, that you exist, that your potential is there, but you also need to have the windows so that you can see experiences outside of your own and have empathy for other people. And it's all that social emotional learning that people seem to be really afraid of right now, that we seem to need more than ever. And that's where they're coming in, and they're trying to squash a lot of that with the Don't Say Gay bills, with the library book bans, and even bans on things called social emotional learning, of all things. They're afraid of that. And it's because this generation of kids particularly have seen themselves reflected. They don't have to go hide in the dark corners of the library with the one book that's labeling them as mentally disturbed because of who they are. They have books that are celebrating who they are, and other kids are learning about that. And the more that you can take that away and also use language, weaponized language, to vilify people, it goes to John's point. We are in the middle of, or getting towards the late 1930s again, and what was happening with the oppression of people by the Nazi Party. And part of that is not just taking away the language, but it's dehumanizing people to the point where violence and cleansing of people is acceptable. So while they're trying to take away the ability for queer kids to see themselves reflected in books and have those conversations and have their peers talk about them and learn about them, they are also weaponizing language with the increase of calling people groomers and pedophiles. Teachers, parents, any trans person, any drag performer are all getting these labels again, because if you dehumanize people, if you make people into monsters again, then the bumper stickers that I see regularly that talk about, I'm here to take out the pedophiles, with the pictures of the guns, and the emails and the messages that I get regularly from people telling me some really violent things, it emboldens people to do that. And, I've had messages that's like, I'm just waiting for it to be legal for me to kill you. And that's the next step. We're getting close to that almost, it seems like, in the rhetoric. And that's why, again, as everyone said, we have to be paying attention. We cannot take a single one of these kinds of bills lightly, because they are all coming together to create that environment where they can start taking the next steps. And that's when it gets even scarier. I'm Debbie Downer for a reason. It's scary. I just have to say, it's scary.
I think in general, we've talked about a lot of things that are quite scary for the queer community in general. So as a closing question, what do we do? How do we approach this issue? Should we start at the state? Should we go to a federal level? How do we approach pushing back against anti-trans legislation and violence?
So we know a lot about civil disobedience. My personal favorite form of civil disobedience is uncivil obedience, which is you follow the law of the letter, or the letter of the law, just like to the letter. Like, very much it is, if this is the law, I'm going to follow it. I think one of my favorite performance art / protest pieces was this guy in New York City, rode his bike everywhere because it was New York City, and he got tickets on the sidewalk and on the street for riding his bicycle. Both cops told him, you need to ride on the street. The one that gave him a sidewalk ticket said, you need to ride on the street. The one that said you need to ride, or the one who gave him the ticket on the street said, you need to ride on the sidewalk. Technically, New York does have bike lanes, but with the amount of construction and traffic that is in New York City, it is impossible to use them. And so what this guy did was he got so many tickets, he got really mad. And so he just rode in the bike lane. No matter what, he would ride in the bike lane. He rode into construction sites. He rode into wet concrete. He actually crashed his bike into a police car because the police car was sitting in the bike lane. And like that uncivil obedience is like, okay, if that's what the law is going to be, then I'm going to follow the letter of the law. And if that means my bearded face has to start going into the women's restroom, I'm not the one that's going to be the most uncomfortable with that. I can guarantee you that. Like if I knock on the stall door, I'm like, hey, I need some toilet paper. Like that's not going to go over well, right? Like, so finding ways to either follow that civil disobedience of the sit-ins and the nonviolent protests and all of that, or just go the civil or the uncivil obedience route and just follow that law to the letter, which can be very dangerous for trans people. So we need our allies to be doing that more so than us, I would say.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's time to not just be an ally, it's time to be an accomplice. And I love that expression so much because it is the people who have the least risk should be the ones taking the most chances right now. I've seen just in the last few days, a couple of, bands will go out and perform and then they come out in their encore and they're essentially dressed in drag. And they're like, you said that, we can't perform when we're dressed like this. And here we are. What are you going to do about it? And what, are you going to kick us out and then not have this revenue in your town, in your state? We need more of those kinds of actions to show the absurdity of it. But I also think, this is the time that, as my friend Lizette says, to tether the boats. When you're talking about intersectional identities and how do you reconcile those, now's the time for us to be doing the intersectional work. I haven't seen here in our groups any of the intersex activists get to show up and testify against anti-trans bills. Maybe we just don't have a lot of folks organized around here, but we need those people. We need the teachers union showing up. We need the medical folks showing up. We need the sports organizations showing up. We need the business leaders showing up, but also we need the immigration groups showing up. We already know that there are problems at the border and with immigration. And if they run trans people into hiding, they still need a target. They're going to come for you again. We need the groups who are talking about, special needs in schools and understanding autism better. We need those folks showing up because these bills are full of the ableism that I mentioned before. Like there's so much work. There's so many people out there that we could pull together in huge coalitions that would have so much power and have so much of a larger voice than the really loud, obnoxious, right-wing conservative people right now. But we have to get them contacting the legislators. We have to get them making donations to their elected or their potential opponents in elections. We have to put our money where our mouths are, and we have to start doing more to get good people into office, to let people know, take to the streets. We're not going to let you get away with harming one group and letting them silently have to kind of melt away, because then we know you're going to come for the rest of us too, and we are bigger than you. So I think that's the kind of thing that I would like to see us do. Students, young people can do that. Go and find all of those organizations, introduce yourselves, try to ask questions. What do you need from us? Here's what we need from you. How do we support one another? And show that leadership that you're not willing as this generation to make everyone go out and fight their own battles, because in numbers we can get this done.
Yeah, I would just add to that we all have some people in our life that we can talk to. You may feel like you don't have any power or a huge audience that you can influence, but you have people in your life that you can talk to, that you can say like why this is such a big issue and why they should care about it. You can change the minds of anyone in your communities. Call legislators, start locally within, if you're in school, start within your school. I think one of the most impactful things we've seen is students walking out in Florida. Last night, there were over 3,000 people who showed up in Texas at the Capitol. A lot of them were youth who were just saying like, this is enough. We're not going to put up with this anymore. And I think that just, using your voice in whatever way that you can. I mean, kids are on, social media, use TikTok, use all of the things that you have at your disposal to say like, this is not the country that I live in. And like, this is not who we are. Because at the end of the day, there are more of us who care and who love and support queer and trans people than there are on the other side. And we just have to keep being loud enough to prove that we are on the right side of this.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. This webinar will be posted on Youth Celebrate Diversity's YouTube, so if you missed any parts of it, you can check it out there. Thank you to all our panelists tonight for sharing and for showing up, and thank you to YCD for organizing everything. Please take care of yourselves. This is a very heavy topic, so it's important to take breaks and care for yourself. Have a good night. Thank you.